I stepped into that oak-paneled conference room in downtown Austin like a ghost haunting its own funeral. The polished mahogany table reflected the morning light in just the right way, sharp, almost blinding as it hit my face when I sat down. Across from me sat Harold King, our family lawyer, his gaze cool, almost dismissive, as if I were a stranger intruding on a private meeting. To his right, my parents Howard and Eleanor Whitman sat perfectly poised. Designer clothes crisped their posture, straight smugness practically seeping from their pores. Beside them, my sister Vanessa radiated confidence. Her smile polished her nails immaculate as she tapped them against the table's edge with impatience. Harold cleared his throat and slid a thick envelope across the table, stopping it right in front of Vanessa. "Vanessa Whitman," he intoned as stipulated, "this is yours." With a single graceful flick of her wrist, Vanessa pulled out a check $10 million. The number almost seemed obscene in its clarity. Her smile deepened as she turned to our parents. They nodded, pride practically rolling off them like perfume. Then all three turned their eyes toward me. Cold, distant, surgical. "Claire," my father said, his voice flat, stripped of any warmth, "go earn your own." That was it. No envelope, no check, no thank you for years spent helping Grandpa Walter with his research, managing his endless grants, supporting his legacy on that sprawling ranch outside Austin. No acknowledgement of the decades I spent at his side while they all stayed safely detached. I could feel my stomach tighten, but I refused to show it. My fingers traced the lines in the wood grain of that heavy table, willing my pulse to slow. The American dream, I had always believed, was about hard work, merit, loyalty. But here, inheritance was about favoritism, appearances, entitlement. Then Harold's voice cut through the silence again, softer this time, but weighty. "There's one more document." I looked up, so did my family. My father's fingers twitched, betraying something, a flicker of anxiety. My mother's perfectly curated smile faltered just slightly. Even Vanessa's brow furrowed, and then Harold slowly retrieved a battered, yellowed envelope from his briefcase. The handwriting on its surface hit me like a memory crashing into my chest. Thick, precise letters, my grandfather's unmistakable hand. Without opening it, Harold set it carefully on the table, leaving it untouched as if even his fingers didn't quite feel worthy. A chill swept through the room. I recognized that envelope from the ranch. Grandpa had used that kind of stationery for his most private thoughts notes on soil composition sketches of the ranch's early years, and sometimes for letters he never sent. Before anyone could speak, Harold quietly excused himself from the room, leaving us with that one envelope, as if it were a live grenade ticking quietly between us. My parents and Vanessa wasted no time. They ushered her out quickly, their hands brushing her shoulder, their whispers almost too quiet to hear. They didn't look back at me. Not even once. No goodbye, no acknowledgement. I walked alone to my car, parked outside the glass towers of downtown Austin. A gust of hot wind swept leaves across the pavement, rustling around my boots. The air smelled faintly of dust and leather, a scent that instantly reminded me of Grandpa Walter's ranch on the outskirts of town. I hadn't stepped foot there in over a year. I slid behind the wheel but didn't start the engine. Instead, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. A voice inside whispered bitterly, "You don't belong here." Maybe I didn't, but I knew exactly where I did belong. That ranch. The place that had shaped me, held me, taught me to see value in things that couldn't be bought. A place now caught between what it had meant and whatever my family had twisted it into. Without hesitating further, I pulled out of the parking lot and drove straight there. The journey itself felt surreal, the downtown skyline shrinking behind me, the rolling Texas hills rising ahead, familiar yet distant. When I arrived, the gravel crunched beneath my boots as I stepped out onto the long, winding path that led to the white farmhouse. The place looked unchanged, but different somehow, like an actor trying to play itself in an old film. The chimes hanging from the porch jangled softly in the wind, sounding eerie rather than inviting. Then before I could knock, the front door creaked open. Grandma Margaret stood there, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face a map of years and disappointments etched into every line. "So," she said sharply, her voice slicing straight through any defenses I had left, "you finally decided to show up." Her words hit me harder than I expected. My throat tightened as I searched her face, hoping, almost begging for warmth, confusion, anything but the sharp, cold judgment reflected in her gaze. "Grandma Margaret, what's going on?" I asked, stepping forward cautiously. Her eyes didn't soften. "They told me you didn't want to be bothered," she said stiffly. "That you changed your number? That you had a new life, no time for this one." Her voice cracked just slightly, but her spine stayed straight as steel. I froze. "That's not true," I stammered. I came by in March." Vanessa said no one was home. Her face hardened further. "We were here, always." Each word felt like a slap. Then, as if something inside her suddenly gave out, she let her arms drop to her sides and turned away, disappearing into the shadows of the old house. I hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. The air smelled like wood smoke and old paper, a time capsule saturated with memories. It felt as if the house itself had been holding its breath, waiting for this moment. When Grandma Margaret returned, she carried something in her hands, a worn leather notepad. My fingers trembled as she pressed it into my palm. "This," she said quietly, "this is the number he kept calling." My heart clenched as I recognized my grandfather's handwriting on the cover. But when I flipped it open, a sick twist pulled at my stomach. "Grandma," I whispered, my voice barely audible, "this isn't my number. It's not even close. I've had the same number since college." She stared at it silent at first, then finally spoke. Her voice brittle. "They told me you changed it, that you didn't want to be tracked down, that you were ashamed." I stumbled backward until my shoulders hit the wall. My knees almost gave out. Nausea rose in my throat. "They lied to you," I whispered hoarsely. "They cut me off. On purpose." A long, painful pause settled between us as her expression shifted. Something inside her unfreezing, her fingers trembling as she sank into her chair by the old fireplace. Then she spoke again, her voice breaking. "They told everyone the funeral was at noon." My heart stopped. "I showed up at noon," I gasped. Her eyes filled with tears. "It was at 9, she whispered. And right there, right in that quiet, dusty room, something shattered completely. I dropped to my knees beside her, clutching her frail hand as a single chime rang out from the grandfather clock in the corner. A hollow, echoing sound that seemed to mark the exact moment I understood. This wasn't negligence. This was betrayal. Careful, calculated betrayal. The ranch, Grandpa's funeral, my entire family's legacy. It was all a carefully orchestrated exclusion. And in that instant, something hardened inside me too. I was no longer just the black sheep they could cast aside. I was here, and I was staying. But before I could speak again, a sound at the door made both of us freeze. The screen door creaked softly. A shadow moved behind it. They were already arriving. And they didn't know I was here. Yet, the front door creaked again, a sound so small, but it felt deafening in the silence that had fallen over the farmhouse. I held my breath as the shadow outside shifted. My palms felt clammy cold despite the Texas heat still pressing in from outside. I glanced at Grandma Margaret, whose face was stone-set, her eyes focused but betraying a tremor underneath. She hadn't said another word since the truth about the funeral's timing slipped from her lips, since we both realized just how deliberate my family's betrayal had been. Outside, the unmistakable cadence of my mother's voice rang out saccharine and sharp-edged. "It smells exactly the same in here, doesn't it?" she said, her tone performative as though she were narrating her arrival for an invisible audience. I stayed still out of sight, tucked in the corner near the old kitchen table where Grandpa Walter used to sit tapping his pen thoughtfully as he read my college essays on plant memory. My heart raced. Every inch of me told me to flee, but this time I wasn't leaving. From where I sat, I could hear every step, the sharp tap of my mother's heels on the worn wood floors, the deliberate pause before she said too loudly, "Honestly, I thought this was all handled already." My father's voice followed cool, clinical, as if he were discussing a quarterly report, not the house and legacy of his own father. "We shouldn't have had to come back at all. Harold should have finalized this by now." And then Vanessa's voice, the one that used to call me sis, like it meant something, dripped with impatience. "Seriously, this couldn't wait until after probate. I have meetings tomorrow." Their casual dismissal stung more than any outright insult. But what cut deepest was how they still assumed they were in control, that their manipulation had left no cracks, no survivors. But the cracks were everywhere now, and I was still here. The house itself seemed to hum with tension as Grandma Margaret moved briskly to the entryway, her voice suddenly sharper than I had ever heard it. "Everyone into the living room," she said. Not a request, a command. I could almost see the confusion on their faces, even from where I sat hidden just around the corner. My mother's faux sweet tone faltered. My father cleared his throat. Vanessa gave a theatrical sigh. They obeyed, though. Of course they did. As they moved into the old living room, I rose from my seat. My knees felt stiff but steady as I crossed to the window, peeking just enough to glimpse them all settling into Grandpa's old leather chairs, the very ones where he'd sat teaching me about weather patterns and Texas soil, while they had stayed safely detached from the dirt. Outside, Harold King's car crunched up the gravel drive. Perfect timing. I stepped back, breath shallow but controlled. "Claire," Grandma Margaret called. Her voice rang through the house, not loud but deliberate enough to silence every conversation instantly. The atmosphere shifted. You could feel it even through the walls. I walked into the living room, every step feeling heavier than the last, but I held my head high. My mother's face froze mid-smile, my father's eyes narrowed. Vanessa's mouth opened slightly as if to speak, but no words came out. "Claire is here," Grandma Margaret said simply, almost like an announcement at a formal ball. Then she added with steel in her tone, "And she has every right to hear what's in that envelope." Their faces gave everything away. A momentary flash of guilt in my mother's eyes. A tightening around my father's jaw. Vanessa's nails digging into the arm of the chair. I sat down opposite them, my pulse loud in my ears, but my face calm. The old clock on the mantel ticked steadily, a metronome for this surreal family tableau. Harold entered without knocking, carrying the battered, yellowed envelope in both hands as if it were something sacred. He looked first at Grandma Margaret, then at me, then finally almost reluctantly at the others. This, he said quietly, was entrusted to me by Walter Whitman himself. His explicit instructions were to deliver it when and only when all interested parties were gathered, and his granddaughter Claire had returned to this house. I felt a rush of warmth from Grandma Margaret. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't alone. This isn't just a legal formality, Harold continued. This is Walter's last word, his true intentions. I could see my father's fingers twitch again his tell whenever he felt cornered. Go ahead, I said softly, nodding at Harold. He opened the envelope with care. Inside wasn't just a will, it was something else, something heavier. He pulled out a folded piece of paper stained and soft with age and a photograph. I recognized the photograph immediately. It was me, maybe 7 or 8 years old, seated next to Grandpa Walter in the field behind the ranch, surrounded by wild Texas daisies. The same daisies he had planted when I was born, calling them Claire's flowers. That photo alone was a symbol, a reminder that the ranch wasn't just land. It was where I had belonged all along, even if my family had tried to erase me from it. But Harold wasn't finished. He read aloud, "To my granddaughter Claire, who never turned her back on the land that made this family who we are. I leave this house, these fields, and every acre that bears the Whitman name. May she find in them the peace and purpose that eluded us all." I heard the sharp intake of breath from across the room. My mother's manicured fingers clenched so tightly on her glass that I thought it might shatter. Vanessa let out a low gasp. But my father said nothing. His silence said everything. For the first time in years, the power in this family dynamic had shifted. And it was only just beginning. Before Harold could continue reading, the front door banged open with a force that made all of us jump. A figure stepped inside, silhouetted by the fading Texas sunset. It was Jacob, my father's old business partner and one of his closest confidants. His face was drawn tight, his expression unreadable. "I heard there's a meeting," he said, his gaze locking directly onto me. Grandma Margaret rose slowly from her chair. "Yes, Jacob," she said, her voice as steady as ever. "And you arrived right on time." I swallowed, hard heart racing again, but this time for a different reason. Because if Jacob was here, it meant this wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. Something deeper was coming. Something none of them expected. And this time, I was ready. Jacob's boots hit the old wood floor with a heavy, deliberate thud as he stepped fully into the room. The sunset behind him bathed the doorway in a fading orange glow, casting his face in half shadow, an effect that made the tension in the air almost unbearable. His gaze never wavered as he looked straight at me, and though I hadn't seen Jacob in years, the tight line of his mouth and the way he held his shoulders told me this visit was not casual. The living room with its faded floral drapes and battered armchairs had gone completely silent. Even Harold King, so meticulous and measured, seemed to hesitate. Grandma Margaret, still standing beside the old mantel, spoke first. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of authority. "Jacob has something we all need to hear." My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. For a man so skilled at projecting power, this slight movement was telling. Vanessa sat rigid, her carefully polished facade cracking around the edges as her gaze darted from Jacob to our mother and back. "What is this about?" my mother demanded, trying to reclaim control. Her voice was pitched higher than usual, too sweet to be genuine. Jacob ignored her entirely. His eyes remained locked on mine as he stepped closer and pulled a small, leather-bound notebook from the inside of his weathered denim jacket, a notebook so familiar my breath caught. I knew that notebook. It was Grandpa Walter's, but not the one I'd held earlier. This one was different, older, more worn. The edges frayed from years of use. Jacob cleared his throat, his voice rough, betraying a hint of emotion. "Before Walter passed, he entrusted this to me. He asked me to keep it safe. Told me to bring it here if things played out the way he feared they would." My pulse quickened, a deep ache building in my chest. The symbolism was unmistakable. This wasn't just a notebook. This was another crack in the carefully constructed facade my family had built. "What the hell is this?" my father snapped, leaning forward in his chair, trying to dominate the conversation. But Jacob didn't flinch. He flipped the notebook open, revealing pages dense with Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting. His hand was steady as he turned to a page marked by a yellowing ribbon. Then he read aloud, "My legacy was never meant to be divided by favoritism or appearances. If you're reading this, it means the family has done exactly what I feared. Shut Claire out, manipulated her absence, and turned this ranch into a pawn in their games. But I want the truth known. This land was never about money. It was about stewardship. It was about the only child who stayed connected to what it meant." The room froze. My mother's face drained of color. Vanessa's nails dug deep into the arm of her chair. Even my father's usually impenetrable expression cracked. Jacob turned the notebook toward Harold King. "There's more," he said quietly. "Financial records, letters, proof of deliberate exclusion. Every lie they told Claire documented here in Walter's own hand." A rush of emotions surged through me, grief, anger, vindication all at once. I could see the dynamic shifting right in front of me. The balance of power that my parents and Vanessa had clung to so smugly was crumbling piece by piece. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Harold stepped forward slowly, taking the notebook from Jacob with both hands as if it weighed far more than its modest size suggested. He cleared his throat. "We'll need to review this," he said evenly, "but from what I'm seeing, it changes everything." Vanessa finally found her voice sharp and dripping with entitlement. "You can't be serious. This doesn't change the formal will. Dad say something?" My father's jaw worked silently, but no words came. It was Grandma Margaret who spoke next, quiet but with a steel edge that silenced everyone. "It changes everything because it shows intent. Walter's intent. And that matters more than any convenient paperwork." Her gaze shifted to Harold. "You'll make sure that truth is respected." Harold nodded solemnly. Outside, dusk had fully settled. The cicadas were singing their hum, rising and falling like waves, a soundtrack to this moment of reckoning. Jacob crossed the room and stood next to Grandma Margaret, folding his arms as if staking a claim. He had been Grandpa Walter's confidant all along, and I wasn't alone. But then, just as the atmosphere settled into a heavy, almost eerie calm, another car pulled up the gravel drive. Headlights flared through the window, casting long shadows across the old farmhouse floor. The sound of an engine cutting off. A door slamming. Vanessa leapt to her feet, her voice rising in panic. "That's Betty. She's here." Grandma Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. Betty. The name alone sent a shiver down my spine, a name I hadn't heard in years, but that was woven through whispers and unfinished stories around this family. Betty was the family's old accountant, and rumor had it she knew things no one else did. Twist after twist was stacking up, and now whoever Betty really was to my family, she was here. For a moment, we all froze, listening to the approaching footsteps on the porch. The front door creaked open, and a figure stepped in, a woman, her expression unreadable, a large leather briefcase in her hand. Without even removing her sunglasses, she simply said, "I have something that belongs to Claire." And just like that, the air itself felt like it had been sucked out of the room. Another secret, another revelation. And this time, whatever she was carrying might finally expose just how deep this betrayal really went. Betty's entrance sliced through the tension like a blade, sharp, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. She stood in the doorway, framed by the last light of day, her silhouette lean and composed. The heavy leather briefcase in her right hand looked almost too large for her slight frame, but she carried it like a weapon. And her words echoed in the room, "I have something that belongs to Claire." A cold silence settled around us. Even Vanessa, always quick with a snide remark or manufactured smile, seemed momentarily frozen. Grandma Margaret was the first to move. She gestured calmly toward the empty armchair near the fireplace, the one Grandpa Walter had always called the seat of reason. "Come in, Betty," she said evenly. Betty nodded once, stepping fully into the farmhouse and closing the door behind her with a soft click. She removed her sunglasses, slowly revealing sharp gray eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the scene, the tension, the barely concealed resentment, the cracks in this perfect family portrait. Then she placed the briefcase carefully on the old coffee table and looked straight at me. "Claire, before Walter died," she began, her voice clear, but softened at the edges with something almost like sympathy. "He entrusted me with this file. His final financial records. He said you were the only one who should see it first." My throat tightened. For a moment, the sound of cicadas outside filled the space between her words, their rhythmic song, a reminder that we were still rooted here on this land they had tried to erase me from. "Go on," Grandma Margaret said firmly, turning toward me. Her hand brushed my shoulder gently, a gesture so small yet so grounding. I stepped forward, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. My parents sat stiffly on the edge of their seats, their practiced composure fraying visibly. My father's fingers tapped an erratic rhythm against his thigh. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, as if willing the briefcase to disappear altogether. Betty clicked open the latches. Inside, meticulously arranged folders and documents, their corners marked with colored tabs and Grandpa Walter's handwriting, in the margins his unmistakable blocky letters. But what struck me immediately was a photograph lying right on top. A faded picture of Grandpa Walter and me standing together beside the newly built north fence line. A fence I had helped repair one summer long before the estrangement began. In my mind, I could almost feel the hot sun that day, the scratch of prairie grass against my legs, and the way Grandpa's calloused hand rested protectively on my shoulder. This was not just a file, this was personal. Betty lifted the photo gently and handed it to me before removing a thick folder beneath it. She opened it slowly and read aloud, not to the room, but directly to me, "Claire. If you are reading this, it means my fears came true. They manipulated you out of your inheritance, your place here, and your dignity." A sharp intake of breath came from my mother's direction. Then Betty's voice hardened, shifting into something almost surgical in precision. "Walter documented every withdrawal, every asset transfer, every private family trust, and how your father and Vanessa pressured him to restructure the estate behind your back. This isn't just family betrayal, it's fraud." The word hit like a punch to the chest. Fraud. Legal, actionable. My pulse surged in my ears as Betty laid out the details: forged signatures, falsified meeting notes, temporary asset transfers that had conveniently never been reversed. I glanced at Harold King. Even the seasoned lawyer looked shaken. Vanessa found her voice at last. "This is nonsense," she spat. "Old accounts. Misunderstandings. Dad, say something." My father opened his mouth, but no sound came. Instead, he fixed Betty with a glare that was all venom and no substance. Betty didn't flinch. Her gray eyes pinned him in place. Then she turned to Harold and handed him a separate sealed envelope. Walter left specific instructions that this envelope be opened, if and only if these records were revealed, she said coolly. Harold hesitated just long enough for every eye to lock on him. Then he broke the seal. Inside was a single page, a letter written in Grandpa Walter's hand. He read aloud, his voice steady but tinged with gravity. "In the event Claire is denied what is rightfully hers, I instruct that all my remaining assets, including financial trusts, land deeds, and mineral rights, transfer solely to her. All conditions of prior revisions are null and void if found to be the result of fraud." The room was stunned into silence. It was my mother who cracked first, her mask of control finally slipping. This can't be legal." Walter was confused, old, he wasn't thinking clearly, but her voice faltered. Because everyone in the room could see the truth, this was deliberate. Grandpa Walter had prepared for this very scenario. Outside, dusk had deepened. A lone owl called in the distance, a sound that made the moment feel timeless, as though generations of Whitmans were watching this reckoning unfold. And then, just as the atmosphere seemed to settle into its new reality, a knock came at the door. A sharp, urgent knock. Betty froze mid-sentence. Everyone turned toward the sound. Without waiting for permission, the door swung open, and standing there was a sheriff's deputy, uniform, neat expression, grim. His gaze swept across the room before landing on my father and Vanessa. "I'm here on behalf of Travis County," he said. "I have a court order to seize records pertaining to allegations of financial fraud and elder abuse. Effective immediately." The air drained from the room as though a vacuum had sucked out all pretense. For the first time, my father looked genuinely rattled, no longer the untouchable patriarch, but a man caught out in front of everyone. Even Vanessa paled visibly, her polished exterior cracking as the deputy stepped fully inside. And just before anyone could react, before a word could be spoken, the deputy added quietly but firmly, "There's more. Claire, I think you'll want to see what we found." A surge of dread mixed with vindication shot through me. What had they found? The betrayal ran even deeper than I'd realized. The deputy's words hung in the air like a sudden drop in temperature. "Claire, I think you'll want to see what we found." Every eye in the room snapped toward him, but he only looked at me, calm, steady, with that same careful authority that can both comfort and chill depending on what follows. My heart pounded not just with adrenaline, but something deeper. A trembling mix of fear and vindication. I had thought this nightmare was almost over. But apparently we were just peeling back another layer. He reached into the leather folder tucked under his arm and pulled out a thin plastic evidence bag. Inside, a small black USB drive. It looked ordinary, almost laughably small, but my breath hitched the moment I saw a sticker across its side, a simple handwritten note in Grandpa Walter's script for Claire, in case they lie. The deputy held it out carefully, almost reverently. "We recovered this from a locked safe at Walter's ranch office during the preliminary investigation," he said. "Hidden behind a false panel. Based on initial review, it contains audio files, recordings made by Walter over the last 2 years of his life. Audio files. Proof possibly in Grandpa's own voice of everything that had transpired." The symbolism struck me instantly. For all their attempts to silence me, here was Walter, literally leaving me a voice from beyond the grave, a final chance for him to be heard and for me to reclaim the truth. I reached out, fingers shaking slightly, and took the bag from the deputy. The plastic crinkled softly under my grip. What's on those files?" Vanessa demanded, rising from her chair, her voice rising too shrill now, desperate. The deputy didn't flinch. "That's for Claire to decide," he replied evenly. "But I can tell you this, your father and you are both named frequently." I felt a chill creep down my spine. My mother's composure finally cracked. She turned sharply to my father. "What is this, Howard? What did you two do?" But my father, for the first time in my life, looked defeated. His shoulders sagged, his jaw slackened. He simply stared at the floor as if he could fall through it. Grandma Margaret's voice, steady and soft, cut through the rising tension. "Claire, would you like us to play it here?" Her question felt both practical and deeply weighted. Part of me wanted to flee, to go somewhere private and listen alone where the emotional bombshell I was about to face wouldn't be watched like a show. But another part, the part that had been dismissed and erased for too long, held fast. "No," I said firmly, "we listen here together." The deputy nodded and stepped aside to let Harold retrieve a laptop from his briefcase. Harold, who had remained composed until now, handled the setup with a gravity that made clear this was no ordinary family squabble anymore. The first audio file loaded its timestamp glaring on the screen 6 months before Grandpa Walter's death. Then his voice. His unmistakable gravelly Texas drawl filled the room and instantly silenced everyone. "They think I don't know," Walter said softly, almost sadly. "But I see it." Vanessa and Howard whispering in corners, pressuring me to change the will, telling Margaret that Claire moved on. They lied, again and again, even about her number. They isolated me, and they're about to do the same to this land. I felt as if the very air was squeezing my chest. The room was frozen, every word from that recording striking like a hammer. Another file autoplayed. "Today they brought papers," Walter's voice continued, now more resolute. "Said it was just a small adjustment. No, I won't sign anything else. I'm leaving this for Claire. She deserves to know, all of it." The deputy paused the playback, looking to me for direction. I couldn't speak at first. My throat felt tight, my palms slick with sweat. But my gaze swept across the room and I saw it, the cracks splitting wide open. Vanessa's face was pale, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone as if a text or call could somehow undo what we were hearing. My mother sat rigid, mouth set in a grim line, but her eyes darted, calculating. And my father? My father seemed smaller than I'd ever seen him. He didn't even meet my gaze anymore. But Betty was watching them all, her cool, analytical eyes tracking every twitch, every tremor. "I have more," she said suddenly, her voice slicing through the tension. "Claire, you should know this isn't just about family betrayal." She reached into her briefcase again. Another envelope. This one marked not with Grandpa's handwriting, but an official seal, the state comptroller's office. A government investigation. Her fingers brushed the worn edge as she slid it toward me. "Walter also suspected misappropriation of ranch funds tied to Howard's business interests," Betty said calmly. "He filed a formal inquiry before he passed. The audit findings arrived just this week." It felt as though the room tilted under my feet. This wasn't just emotional betrayal anymore. This was criminal. Fraud, elder abuse, and now possible financial crimes involving state regulators. My entire life I'd believed I was the black sheep, the outsider, the disappointment. But now it was clear they had built their success on deception, lies, and stolen trust, and Grandpa Walter had known all along. I reached for the envelope, my fingers brushing the crisp paper, the seal cool beneath my thumb. But before I could break it open, a sudden loud knock shattered the stillness. Not a gentle knock this time. A pounding, urgent, forceful. Jacob stepped forward, instinctively blocking my view of the door. Outside headlights swept across the porch. Then a voice called out, one that made everyone freeze. Even Betty. "Open up. This is federal jurisdiction now. Step away from the property." A new layer of reality settled hard over us. Federal. Not just local deputies. This was bigger than any of us realized. And I was standing at the center of it. The pounding on the door sent a shockwave through the farmhouse, every pair of eyes darting toward the entryway as the voice repeated louder this time. "This is federal jurisdiction now. Open the door." The weight of that moment settled over me like a heavy blanket. I could feel the sweat on my palms cool instantly as dread and adrenaline tangled inside me. I glanced at Grandma Margaret. Her fingers gripped the armrest tightly, but her face remained stoic, her posture a reminder that she had weathered storms far worse than this. Vanessa, on the other hand, was unraveling before my eyes. Her usual veneer of effortless confidence was gone. She was pacing, wringing her hands, muttering under her breath, "This can't be happening. This isn't real." My father sat silent, shoulders hunched as if trying to fold himself small enough to escape the consequences gathering at the front door. And then the door opened calmly without drama because Jacob stepped forward and pulled it wide before anyone else could move. Two federal agents stepped inside dark suits, clipped badges at their hips, professional but not cold. Their presence changed everything. The stakes had shifted from family betrayal to criminal exposure. The taller agent, a woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing, surveyed the room and spoke directly to me, Claire Whitman. I swallowed hard but met her gaze steadily. Yes. She nodded once. "We have probable cause and a federal warrant to seize all estate records related to the Whitman family trusts and land holdings, including this property itself. The investigation pertains to suspected wire fraud, tax evasion, and financial elder abuse." The room froze. The words wire fraud and tax evasion hit even harder than I expected, like jagged stones thrown through an already shattered window. My mother let out a tiny gasp, a sound so fragile I almost pitied her. Almost. But the agent wasn't finished. She stepped forward carefully and added, "In addition, Claire, there are the indications that your personal communications and accounts were unlawfully intercepted over the last 2 years. We will need to speak with you further as a protected party." A protected party? I didn't even know what that meant yet, but something inside me settled for the first time in years. They weren't here to target me. They were here because the truth had become undeniable. Vanessa spun on my father, her voice sharp, panicked. "Howard, what did you do? Did you know about this?" My father's face was gray now, drained of all pretense. He didn't answer her. He couldn't. His silence spoke louder than any confession. Harold King, the lawyer who had sat through all of this with that polished courtroom calm, finally broke his quiet. "This is no longer a family matter," he said, rising from his chair. "Claire, I advise you to let them take what they need. This investigation is far beyond probate now." He was right. But even as I nodded, a twist was still waiting for us. One of the agents moved toward Betty, asking politely but firmly, "Ma'am, are you Elizabeth Betty Carmichael CPA?" Betty straightened her shoulders, a hint of steel in her expression. "I am." The agent produced a small folder from his jacket and handed it to her. "You are named in sealed documents as a witness and confidential informant. You'll need to accompany us today for immediate debriefing." The air felt like it had been sucked from the room all over again. Betty, an informant. Grandpa Walter hadn't just left her in charge of files. He had trusted her to cooperate with a federal investigation from the start. Every move, every hidden file, every instruction she had carried out, it had all been part of something much larger than family inheritance. Betty glanced at me before speaking. Her gaze softened for the first time, almost maternal. "I did what Walter asked," she said gently. "This was his plan all along, Claire. To protect you and to protect this land from them." Her words landed with a weight that almost buckled my knees. But before I could respond, before I could thank her or even breathe, the taller agent turned back to me. "And Claire," she added quietly, "there's one more matter." She reached into her breast pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper, an official document, crisp and stamped. She extended it carefully toward me. I hesitated, then took it with trembling fingers, my throat dry. As I unfolded it, my breath caught. It was a letter from the State of Texas Department of Natural Resources. An official finding. At the bottom, a single line leapt from the page. "Declaration of Protected Conservation Status, Whitman Ranch, and all adjacent lands placed under immediate federal environmental protection, pending final transfer to legal heir Claire Whitman." A wave of emotion crashed over me. This ranch, this land, Grandpa Walter's legacy, it was protected now beyond their reach, beyond manipulation. They couldn't strip it for parts or sell it off in quiet deals anymore. The symbolism wasn't lost on me, this land which had shaped my childhood, which held my best memories and my worst wounds. It was now declared sacred in a way by the very government they had tried to outmaneuver. The irony was perfect. But even as this truth settled over me like a balm, I could feel the room changing again. My family's empire was collapsing right here in real time, and I was standing in the center, not broken but rising. Then just as I felt my heartbeat begin to slow, the second agent's radio crackled to life and, "Be advised," a voice said, urgent but calm. "We have a secondary search order. Unmarked vehicles approaching the property. External parties involved. Hold position until backup arrives." Jacob tensed beside me. Betty's eyes widened. And in that instant, I realized this wasn't over. Whatever was coming next wasn't from my family. A new player had entered the scene, and I didn't even know who they were yet. Outside, gravel crunched, slow, deliberate, unmistakable. The radio crackled again, the voice terse this time. 3 unmarked SUVs on approach, unknown occupants. Every head in the room turned toward the window, tension knitting us together in uneasy silence. Even Vanessa, her earlier bravado drained away, edged closer to my mother, clutching her arm like a lifeline. I stood frozen, clutching the conservation order in one hand and the USB drive in the other. The federal agents exchanged a sharp glance before stepping toward the door, one of them lowering a hand to the holster at his hip. Jacob moved too, sliding himself protectively between me and the entryway, a small gesture, but it rooted me somehow. Grandma Margaret sat calmly, her hands folded in her lap, but there was steel in her gaze. For all that she had endured betrayals, lies, manipulation, she wasn't flinching now. Then came a knock, not the urgent official knock we had heard before. No, this one was slow, deliberate, almost polite. The taller agent called out, "Identify yourself." A pause. Then a voice replied, a male voice, smooth, calm, and chilling in its confidence. "We represent Western Holdings Consortium. We're here regarding outstanding liens against the Whitman property and associated mineral rights." The words sliced through the room. Outstanding liens, mineral rights. My stomach turned cold. Even in death, my father's machinations reached farther than I had imagined. Somehow, amidst all the fraudulent transfers and forged documents, he had entangled the ranch in debts or sold promises he couldn't keep. The agent turned to Harold King, her brow furrowed. "Did you know anything about this?" Harold's face was ashen. "No, this wasn't disclosed. Not in probate, not in Walter's files." The second agent's radio crackled again. "They have paperwork. Filing recorded at county registrar, backdated 6 months prior to Mr. Whitman's death. Fraud, layers upon layers of it. I felt the weight of it all, the ranch. The land I thought I'd finally reclaimed, the legacy I had just begun to understand slipping through my fingers again." Jacob put a hand on my shoulder. "Claire," he said quietly, his voice rough but steady, "don't panic. We'll fight this too." Walter was careful. Betty, sitting near the fireplace, shook her head slowly. "Western Holdings. I've heard of them," she murmured. They're vultures. They specialize in shady acquisitions, quietly scooping up land and mineral rights from families too distracted or too broken to defend themselves. Her words hit hard because they were true. That's what my family had become, a fractured mess ripe for predators like these. But just as quickly as that despair set in, something clicked. The file, the notebook, the audio recordings. Walter had known about this too, hadn't? Why else would he have asked Betty to safeguard not only his private records, but to cooperate with federal investigators? I stepped forward, my voice shaking slightly but gaining strength with each word. If they think they can walk in and take this land, they're wrong. I turned to the agents. We have evidence, audio files, ledgers, even state conservation protections. That paperwork they're waving around, I bet it's as fraudulent as everything else my father and sister touched. The taller agent gave me a short nod. That's why we're here, Claire. We won't let this go unchecked. But outside which says, Shabadi on my knee, Dina. The footsteps approached the bottom of the porch. They weren't waiting for permission to enter anymore. The doorknob rattled. The agent nearest the door drew her weapon low, professional. Not panicked, but ready. Stay behind me, she said calmly. Then a voice called from outside again, but this time it wasn't from Western Holdings. It was a familiar voice. Low, gravelly. My breath hitched. I froze. It couldn't be. The voice called again, Claire, it's me. I knew that voice. It was my Uncle Walter's estranged younger brother Calvin, a man I hadn't seen since I was a child. The uncle who had left this family decades ago, exiled after a mysterious falling out with my grandfather. No one spoke of him. Ever. But there he was standing outside the door. And somehow he had come back right in the middle of this chaos. What did he know? Why now? The agent held her position but turned slightly toward me. Claire, she said calmly, do you want us to let him in? And that's where it ended for tonight. Because in that moment I realized this story wasn't just about fraud, betrayal, or even inheritance. It was about legacy. About secrets older than I could imagine, secrets that Uncle Calvin might finally be ready to reveal. Story 2. You've finished your role. Leave this place. My thoughts went blank as soon as I heard those words. I was met with an empty room when I got home from work. The days I had spent establishing my life there were completely gone. We need a larger room because Howell and I will be living together. Your room will serve as our bedroom. Like every day that day. I worked extra and arrived home late. I just made it back to the house via car. I thought I could finally unwind, but as soon as I entered my room, I froze. The door was partially open. Everything was gone when I entered the bed, bookshelves, and closet. Any indication that I had ever been there seemed to have been totally removed. My mom looked at me and smiled slightly as she watched TV in the living room. I removed all you owned. I gazed at my mother as I stood there. What are you saying? I sounded so weak. She seemed to hear it fine, yet it almost disappeared. We need a larger room because Howell and I will be living together. Your room will serve as our bedroom. As though I had never truly belonged there in the first place, she stated it in a natural way. I repeated my question. You made all of these decisions without consulting me at all, not even taking your eyes off the television. Calmly, she answered. I take it that you no longer require it? Your role is over. Leave this place. I had the impression that something heavy and chilly had just been dropped into my heart. It was the day following my completion of Crystal's tuition payments at the university. To this point, how much had I given and exhausted myself, I understand. I didn't even inquire where my belongings were, that was all I said. I moved in the direction of the front entrance. All that was left in the hallway was my father's memorial photo, which I once looked at when I opened the door. I was surrounded by the night's quiet and moist air. With that one notion, I had to leave that house. My phone vibrated as soon as I made my first step. Crystal, the screen stated. I hesitated for a second, but the timing was too good. Her happy voice echoed as I responded. Big sister, what just transpired will astound you. I inhaled deeply before responding in a composed tone. What is it? I was chosen as an exceptional student, and I will receive a scholarship? Isn't that incredible? I nearly burst into tears. The news was absolutely fantastic. With all my heart, I was proud of her. I had the impression that my time and encouragement had not been in vain. But not just that. Hearing it at this moment had a bitterly ironic quality. That's fantastic. Really, I made an effort to sound natural, but my voice faltered a bit. Big sister, has something taken place? Yes, I just got out of the house, actually. I doubt that I will return. What? There was silence on the other end of the line. I briefly explained the situation. The fact that my room had been given away without my consent, the fact that my mother said your role is over, and the fact that I was now standing there with nowhere to go. Crystal was silent for a while. After a long pause, she finally spoke in a strained voice. That's awful. I can't believe it. But it's okay now. I don't want to stay in that house anymore, not if it means wearing myself down. Congratulations on the scholarship. You really worked hard, sis. I want to live with you. From now on, it's my turn to help. I don't want you to be alone. Her words nearly brought me to tears. I had always thought of her as a child who didn't understand anything, that it was only natural for her to be spoiled, and that I had to be the one to support her. But without realizing it, she had started to grow up too. I haven't contacted them yet, but I'm thinking of going to Dad's parents' place, Grandpa and Grandma's house. Wait, I barely even know them. I agree. The last time I saw them was at Dad's funeral. We haven't kept in touch at all, so I don't know what things are like now, but I think Grandpa and Grandma would take me in at the very least. They're not like Mom. I'll go too. I want to go. Crystal's voice was full of determination. It might have been the first time I'd ever heard her speak like that. I looked up at the sky. Then I'll come get you tomorrow. Start packing your things. Okay, I will. Those words made my chest tighten. After hanging up the phone, I took a deep breath. The air I exhaled melted into the quiet of the night. I began to walk not to fulfill someone else's role, but to reclaim my own life. That night, I stayed at a nearby budget hotel. I couldn't think about anything. I just collapsed onto the bed. Luckily, I had the next day off from work. Since I couldn't sleep right away, I started to think about the past. My father passed away when I was 24. It was a heart attack so sudden and so abrupt that I couldn't absorb any of it. Still, time passed on and life began with only my mother, Crystal, and myself. I worked as a financial analyst. My days were packed with figures and market pressure. Not easy, but the revenue was constant. My mother worked part-time, but her wages were small and couldn't meet our living needs. She always said that you're the only one I can rely on. Every time she said it, something inside me informed me. I have to support them. If I didn't, I couldn't be a suitable replacement for Dad. That's how I naturally came to burden the home financially, calm my mother's mental condition, and assist Crystal through high school so she could focus on her future. Crystal is 7 years younger than me. Ever since she was tiny, I had been the one holding her hand. When our parents battled and she sobbed, I'd bring her to the adjacent park and push her on the swing to quiet her down. Back then, she always clung to my sleeve, shouting, "Sis, sis." Additionally, she was so cute that I felt compelled to look after her throughout mealtimes. After bathing, I showed her how to use a spoon. At night, I dried her hair. Despite the stressful atmosphere in the house, I fell asleep next to her and read picture books to her. I was saved by the sight of Crystal's grin. My heart tightened as if I were seeing the maturation of my own child when I first saw her wearing a school backpack. I felt more like a tiny mother who was desperate to keep her safe than a sister. Crystal was immediately loved by others since she was upbeat and gregarious. Her mother loved her and lavished her with affection. As soon as she started high school, Mother insisted that Crystal was still a child. I gave her about everything she requested and let her have fun. A mobile phone, journeys, concert tickets. I used my money to cover the majority of those. I, on the other hand, never traveled. Oh no, name brand products. She gave the family almost everything, each and every paycheck. I paid for Mother's expenditures, the home payments, and even Crystal's living expenses and schooling. I also never voiced any complaints. Almost the course of 2 years, I spent almost $30,000 on Crystal's college expenditures. Mother didn't express thanks. Instead, she pretended that it was only expected, even though it was late when I arrived home. She was in front of the television, giggling. I wasn't considered a daughter at home. I received manager-level treatment. Someone in charge of controlling the finances and emotions. I was able to connect with the family in this way, by obligation, not by affection. But I was at my breaking point. But I didn't want Crystal to be overly affected by our father's passing. I had decided to wait till she graduated at the very least. Mother began bringing a man called Howell into the family at that time. She first claimed that they were only eating dinner together. His visits, however, increased in frequency over time. Before I knew it, he was relaxing as if it were his own house and he and his mother were secretly getting ready to move in together. Howell was never one of my favorites. He spoke in a condescending manner as if he denigrated other people. He always seemed to be attempting to entice us into his mother's world, and I simply couldn't take it any longer. However, his mother fell deeply in love with him. Her demeanor softened whenever he was mentioned in conversation, and she would hardly pay attention to what I had to say. I felt even more alone after that transition. And ultimately, I was evicted from the residence much more quickly and simply than I had anticipated. I must have slept off while contemplating all of it. The next day, Crystal and I stood at the front entrance of our grandparents' house. My chest constricted. Years have passed since my last visit. My father was still alive the last time I visited. It was the summer following my graduation from college. We had gone together. As I sat next to him feeling a little bashful, I recalled how truly delighted he was to see his parents again. The day of my father's burial was the next time I visited my grandparents. Almost immediately after ringing the doorbell, I heard footsteps. My granddad emerged when the door opened. Aurora. His eyes grew wide before softening into a kind grin. Hello, grandfather. A long time has passed. Crystal is also with you. What's happening? Enter. It's chilly outside. Grandma rushed out of the living room and gave us a hug. I wanted to cry as I felt her warm arms. It's been a long time. I'm so happy you two arrived. After being shown to the living area, we were given steaming tea. We were surrounded by the comforting smell of old carpet and furniture. An old family portrait of my father when he was younger was hanging on the wall. It was both nostalgic and aloof. Even before we told them everything, our grandparents were really delighted to meet us. Their eyes appeared to comprehend already. You must have endured a great deal. If you don't want to, you don't have to discuss it. However, this is your house. You don't have to keep those words to yourself. At last, something that had been tightly wound inside of me came loose. Thank you. Thank you very much. With tears in her eyes, Crystal bowed her head repeatedly as well. The days that followed seemed nearly tranquil, as if the life we had previously led had been a deception. Spending time like this really calms the heart, Grandpa said as he tended to the garden and Grandma made a warm breakfast every morning. Crystal started a part-time job at a local cafe on the weekends, helped out around the house in the evenings, and attended university during the day. She had changed. After being pampered by our mother and taking my help for granted, the sister was now taking on some of the responsibility herself. I felt a little proud and quietly surprised. We were having tea with our grandparents one evening after supper when Grandma abruptly brought up a topic. It has to do with your father's inheritance, by the way. We were also given a formal notice. However, your mother informed us that both of you had forfeited your portion. Thus, we were convinced, sacrificing our portion. I didn't mean to raise my voice. Crystal put down her teacup as well. Nothing about that was ever disclosed to us. We didn't agree to give up the inheritance, let alone even know it existed. I understand. I believed so. Grandpa sighed a little. It felt strange. Your father was adored by both of you. That you wouldn't want anything from him astounded me. However, we took your mother at her word. I asked my grandparents right away if they still had the old documents. A copy of the inheritance waiver agreement was among the many old documents they took out of the storage room. It had Crystal's and my name as well as strange signatures. This is entirely fake. This document has never been seen before. I pushed the words out. Both grandparents became quiet. No one said anything for a while. Unforgivable. It was Crystal's voice, generally sweet and pleasant. Now, stiff with rage, she put everything upon you, did everything she wanted, and now even grabbed Dad's fortune. That's not family. I bit my lip. Deep down, maybe a part of me had still wanted to believe in her. But this was the ultimate blow. She had taken advantage of our father's death. I will take legal action. When I spoke the words, my voice sounded remarkably calm and clear. She stole her father's fortune. Our signatures were faked by her. I'll make everything clear. Despite their startled expression, our grandparents gave a firm nod. I'll assist if Aurora requests that, but we can. I'll fight with you, Crystal murmured, holding my hand. I couldn't sleep that night, so I laid in bed in the quiet room. If I paid close attention, I could hear a clock ticking away in the distance, subtly signaling the passing of time. Gazing at the ceiling in blankness, I thought back on my life thus far. Taking a look back, for the sake of someone else, I had always been repressing something, muting my own wants. I made an effort to think that it was appropriate to suppress my feelings and give up what I want, that it strengthened me. However, I could have been mistaken. I've finally come to a realization. Choosing to advocate for myself is okay, and it's not selfish at all to make that decision. It was a wise choice to come to this house. There are folks here who are always there for us and who make us feel warm in ways that words cannot express. And for that reason, I took action. I got up the following morning and started moving right away. I went to a lawyer's office initially. I took a seat in front of the female attorney I had scheduled a consultation with. Breathing deeply, he started to describe everything. 5 years ago, my father died. My mother soon said that we had forfeited our inheritance rights, but neither my sister nor I ever made such a statement. They were fake signatures. As she made notes, the lawyer nodded. Then she calmly inquired, "Do you have a copy of the documents?" As she glanced up at me. From my backpack, I took out the copy of the waiver that we had discovered at my grandparents' place. Her expression hardened the moment she saw it. "This is the handwriting and date format. They're all wary. The likelihood that this will be determined to be a counterfeit is substantial if we submit it for handwriting analysis." I gave a quiet nod. "Both civil and criminal proceedings may result from what you're stating. To reclaim the unfairly acquired assets and seek a re-evaluation of the bequest, we first bring a legal complaint. We can also take into consideration filing a criminal case for document falsification and manipulation of private records, given that the signatures were probably faked." I became aware of my increased calmness while I listened. The anguish and the rage were over. Right now, the only thing driving me on was my belief that I had to find a solution to this. Please, I want it all to be revealed. To continue, I obtained the required paperwork, a copy of my father's death certificate, and a family register from that era. In addition, my grandparents assisted by confirming the existence of a will. They discovered several letters and notes, but no formal will. During his lifetime, my father wrote, among them was a message, "I want my daughters to lead happy lives on their own." I laid out the gathered evidence on my grandparents' living room table that evening. Sitting quietly next to me, Crystal reviewed all the things I was unaware of. "I was unaware of how much you were burdened with. I decided to handle it myself. I want to finish it now, though. I don't want anyone else to ruin our life or Dad's memories any longer." That night, Crystal's profile didn't like the younger sister I knew. She no longer wanted to be protected. Instead, she wanted to assume responsibility. The attorney got in touch with me a few days later to let me know the case had been submitted. The civil suit was started, and the complaint had been formally sent to our mother. We were surprised to hear nothing from her. No sobbing, no apologies, no irate calls, just total quiet. Calmly, I took it. I finally got it. She had always viewed us as things to be controlled rather than as family. I had taken a brief leave of absence from my job at the time. To be honest, I wasn't in the appropriate frame of mind to concentrate, and this legal struggle seemed like a life reset. Day by day, I started to gradually regain my identity as I proceeded to get ready for the case. The aroma of the coffee Grandpa poured in the morning, the time spent in the garden with Grandma gathering tomatoes, and the innumerable unsuccessful dinners Crystal attempted to prepare. The life I had known, one motivated by duty to live, felt entirely different from all of this. I was sitting by myself in the peaceful living room one evening, after Grandpa and Grandma had gone to bed, when I noticed a picture of my father's body. Was this the proper course of action? In my mind, the words I spoke slowly dissipated into the space. I was certain that it was proper to sue my mother. However, there was still reluctance simmering silently in the back of the mind. Was bringing your own family to court really acceptable? I quietly asked my father for an answer as I gazed into his gentle eyes in the picture. "Okay, Dad. What would you have done caught between what I still doubted and what is right?" I just sat there and relied on my recollection of him. The truth would soon be exposed in a court of law, but retaliation wasn't the point. It wasn't about hurting people or severing connections with the past. It was just about reclaiming my own life. On the day of the trial, I had finally arrived at the starting line. I inhaled deeply before entering the courtroom. Even though it was my first time in such a place, my legs didn't shake in the chilly, tense air. My lawyer was at my side. My grandparents were seated in Crystal behind us. There was an inner strength that came from knowing that someone was keeping an eye on me. After a few minutes, my mom came into the courtroom. Despite her ostentatious clothing, she had a light complexion. She averted her gaze as soon as our eyes locked. The proceedings proceeded at a steady pace. The attorney showed us the handwriting analysis of the faked inheritance waiver document, which we had never seen before. Then there was the fact that my mother had taken all of my father's possessions by herself and was unable to justify her actions. She had managed family property improperly. These facts were presented by the lawyer in a straightforward but accurate manner. In an attempt to defend her, my mother's attorney said that the waiver needed to be handled promptly because of family misunderstanding. However, his statements lacked power. "Did your girls know about this process?" the judge inquired. "We weren't," I said plainly. "My sister and I have never laid eyes on that paper. They were fake signatures." "How do you feel about the inheritance as you stand here today?" the judge inquired. I spoke gently after carefully selecting my words. My father dedicated his entire life to ensuring that we could live in peace. That objective shouldn't be perverted for the convenience of another person. That's all. My mother abruptly got to her feet at that point. After he passed away, I was trying my hardest. What was I meant to do by myself, and no one responded as her words reverberated across the courtroom. She complied with the judge's kind request to sit. As a witness, I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. Crystal stood up. I took for granted my sister's sacrifices for our family, which I witnessed firsthand. However, I never heard of such waiver document at all, even though I was shaking. As the hearing came to a close, Crystal spoke while looking directly ahead. The verdict was declared. It is acknowledged that the defendant in this instance engaged in document fabrication and unjust enrichment. The plaintiff's compensation and the return of the inherited property are mandated by the court. I think I felt the strain in my back release at that same instant. My mother sat still, staring down, her face hidden. No one remained by her side. That concept never occurred to me, so I didn't feel like I had won. Only a faint feeling that it was at last over pervaded the air. I nodded slightly as I turned to face my grandparents and Crystal. With the warmth of my grandparents' love behind me, I decided to live alone when the trial was over. I made the decision to stand on my own 2 feet. I was at last able to utilize my time and money for myself since I was no longer required to provide for my mother. There were still a lot of unfamiliar things in life, and some evenings seemed a little isolating. Nevertheless, little things made me happy. I enjoyed setting a little plant in the room while sipping tea from a cup. I didn't need to show consideration for others. I couldn't take on anyone's burdens. I was the only one in this space. I was there. I had finally started to take back my life. Additionally, Crystal was pursuing her own goals while juggling part-time employment and education. There was no longer the sister who had depended on our mother. She was replaced with someone who listened while I discussed work and inquired about our grandparents' health at breakfast. After being on leave for a few months, I came back to work. As always, my supervisor and colleagues greeted me with great emotion when I returned. I wasn't laboring to the point of exhaustion this time. I was finally beginning to realize that I was living for myself now. However, that did not imply that my heart was fully restored. I've heard my mother continue to tell relatives things like, "My daughters betrayed me," or "They abandoned their family to her," even after we severed our relationship. As the daughter, I had always been expected to provide for her. I became a traitor the instant I ceased to play that character. Nevertheless, I set a limit in order to take back my life. It was not sinful for me to isolate myself from my mother. I would have broken if I had continued to bear everything. But occasionally I question if I really made the correct decision. During the night's silence, sometimes guilt sneaks in, making me wonder whether I abandoned my family. A part of me that loved her still exists. Furthermore, those recollections haven't entirely vanished. Family is more than simply blood. If remaining together simply makes things worse, then leaving is also a strategy to defend yourself. My grandma whispered those words to me, and they made me feel at ease. A relative called one day and said, "I saw your mom at the grocery store the other day." She appeared quite skinny. She seems to find living alone difficult. Evidently, she had quit her job and Hal had abandoned her. She was now living in an old apartment chasing debt and had no one to assist her. I had no sympathy, no rage. Perhaps my mother's only way to feel good about herself was to exert control over other people. Perhaps she was afraid of standing alone, which is why she forced me to take on the role of family. But if I tried to save her, I would never be able to go back to that world. I would only be used once more. I had made a self-promise to never do it again. We all got together for dinner at my grandparents' place that weekend. Crystal raised her voice as they were eating. "Hello, sister. I believe I want to work as a psychologist once I finish from college. Being able to remain near to people's hearts is what I aspire to." I grinned. That's a fantastic concept in my opinion. You do it well. Crystal gave a timid little chuckle. "I think the only reason I'm who I am now is because you were there for me," Ben said gently. Something in the depths of my heart was warmed by her words. I hadn't made the incorrect choice. I had created space for this peaceful, gentle life by severing my connections to the past. We could never have found what we had here, in a life of sacrifice and dominance, in a loving and equitable relationship. I murmured quietly as I took up my father's framed picture. I've at last discovered a place I can call Family Dad. Thank you. I am aware that you were always keeping an eye on us. This is the future I have chosen, a life that is my mind free from exploitation or sacrifice on the part of others. Finally, this is where it starts.